Good evening, good evening, good evening. Hopefully this is all working this week. Let's come out of that. How are you all? Hope everyone's doing well. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm just getting a few things sorted here and then we'll get cracking. Okay. Okay, that all looks good from that front from OBS. So hopefully you can all hear me. I'm just going to play a little bit of the audio that we got here, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this too. I'm just quickly checking it on OBS as well. Okay, let me know if you didn't hear that. That'd be very handy to know. Hopefully everyone can hear that. Okay, the last thing I need to check is the plugins. So anyone saw last week's stream, let's quickly transition here. Fantastic, you can see the plugins here, and if I do level meter, and that's updated as well. Fantastic. Right, let's quickly go back. Hello, so yes, so apologies last week. If anyone saw last week's live stream, it was going great, about an hour and a half long, and went through lots of different bits to do with it was actually like a real-time master type thing, really fun. Watched the playback after the file rendered on YouTube, and what did I realise? You couldn't see any of the plugins. So anything that I did on that live stream last week, you can actually see. So you'd only be able to hear the differences. So this week, I've made sure that I've got it right in terms of the visuals, and hopefully you can hear everything was coming through loud and clear. So if there's any issues at all, then please let me know in the comments. That will be much appreciated. Okay. Right, so let's get into the content of this week's video. I wanted to do a bit of an overview on Headroom, because I've seen quite a few different remarks around Headroom, and the concept of Headroom is relatively straightforward. It's relatively basic. It's nothing too much to worry about. But there's a few misconceptions around Headroom, what it is, what we need it for, what we don't need it for, and how we can't use it. So I think I just want to go through some of the basics. It's going to be more of a 101. I want to try and keep this more high level. So if you say this is going to be great for those who are relatively new to mastering and want to understand some of the basic concepts of things such as true peak level and obviously like Headroom. We're going to go over a bit around intersample peaks, digital clipping, all that kind of thing. So it's going to be quite high level, but I've tried to keep it as concise as possible and trying to keep it as straight to the point, really. It can be quite in-depth, it can be quite technical, but I don't want to kind of get bogged too down in some of the more technical sides of things. So first and foremost, let's just go through what is Headroom. And to understand what Headroom is, I just need to quickly go through the master channel. So as you see here, I've got a level meter, and this is the BX level meter. On the right hand side of my screen here, I've got the Studio One master channel. And effectively what these are doing, these are measuring peak level. So it's designed to measure the loudest peak or the transient or loudest part of the song. So that is what the main channels do. And this particular one here, we've also got an RMS reading, which is looking at the average loudness, but the peak level is really what we're interested in today. So the master channel, it measures a large range, and the large range is up to, and especially on this one here with the PreSonus one, it's up to and beyond 0. So this one actually goes up to +6. On the Brainworks BX meter here, the peak level goes up to 0, which is known as the digital ceiling. Okay, so that is effectively what the master channel is there for. Just going on to the digital ceiling now. So as with everything, there's always a limit, and digital audio is no different. And digital audio, we have a ceiling or a limit at 0 dBs, which is also known as the digital ceiling. So it's the maximum signal limit before digital distortion occurs, and this occurs in the form of audio clipping. So if you're going through your DAW and you start seeing some red lights flash up around here, and this starts to go crazy up here, that is going to be because digital clipping is occurring. And effectively, it's an undesirable distortion, and it's where the peaks hit the ceiling and the ceiling clips off the top of the peak, and it just creates a harshness. You lose fidelity, and it's just not very desirable. So that's effectively what we get when we get digital distortion and digital clipping. So to prevent digital clipping, we need to leave a buffer, and a buffer effectively is an amount or a level below 0 dBs, and this buffer is referred to as headroom. So it's as simple as that. So if we've got here 0 dBs, we want to make sure that our sum of all channels, so if we're mixing, and if we're mixing all channels, let's say we've got 30 channels, then we want to make sure that in the master channel we have a buffer below 0 dB. So that is what headroom is. Okay, so before we go into why do we need headroom, I'm just going to quickly see if there's any comments there. So it doesn't appear to be any comments. I'm just going to quickly flick out of here. I've got a bit of a new setup going on this week, so I just want to quickly see if there's any comments coming through. We've got 30 channels, okay, and we want to make sure. Brilliant. Okay, so why do we need headroom? Well, headroom first and foremost is going to be needed to prevent clipping. That is the main goal. So if you have too much of a hot peak level, it runs the risk of overloading your master channel, which creates that digital distortion and clipping. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to, let's get OBS here. I'm going to, in fact, let's not mess around with that. Let's just bring this all the way down. Let's get into the DAW, transition there. So I've just brought the master down. In fact, no, we'll leave that as, I don't want that 0. Come watch me drown. Just going to bring the level down. You'll see here, so it's gone red there. So that's going to show that it's clipping. And the peaks are going over 0 dB FS. Okay, so that is the basics of clipping. So we've gone over the digital ceiling, and that's caused that distortion, which isn't very nice. So that's something just to look out for. Now, so why do we need headroom? Obviously to prevent clipping. You run the risk of overloading your master channel, but something that's not often talked about is intersample peaks. And intersample peaks are, it's an anomaly between the analog and the digital domain. So when we mix and master inside the DAW, the audio is referred to as being inside the digital realm, as it's digital audio inside of your digital audio workstation. The issues come is when we listen to that digital audio, it has to go through a conversion process. So it then goes into your audio interface, and it's then spit out in the form of analog. So it comes through either your monitors or headphones, etc. So it's a digital to analog conversion. Okay. During that conversion process, slight changes can actually happen to the audio level, and you might get a slight increase in level. And it's during that process, it's referred to as an intersample peak. So it's in that change between your digital signal to your analog signal, and there's a slight change and an increase in the level. It's called an intersample peak. So if you've got your digital ceiling and you mix or you master right up to 0 dB, or even though your DAW might be showing that the audio is not clipping, actually by the time it's gone through your audio interface, it could clip on the way out. So that is really what you've got to look out for in terms of intersample peaks. So even if your master channel reads a level below 0 dB, the conversion process may still cause the audio to clip, which is the reason why we need a buffer. Okay. Next, I want to quickly go on to true peak levels and quickly just go through. So this is the stock level meter inside of Studio One, and we got this as a true peak reading here. And the true peak levels, they're designed to capture a peak level that takes into consideration any potential intersample peaks. Okay, but we also need to consider this a little bit further. So when we talk about true peak levels as well, we've also got to consider this in the context of a digital distribution platform. So let's take, for instance, we're using something like DistroKid, and we're going to release music to Spotify and the world. Well, the streaming platforms will ask generally for a true peak level of no higher than -1 dB or -2 dB. So we'll achieve that by use of a limiter. So let's just quickly explain. I'll quickly show this in real time here. Hopefully you can see all this. Let's quickly go to the comments. I just want to make sure there's... Okay, there's nothing there. Good, good, good. Okay, so let's go back into Studio One. And let's get a limiter and put a limiter here. Where's the stop limiter? Perfect. Okay, let's use that. In fact, let's put that there. So we're going to use the stop limiter here. And we want, so it's in true peak mode. It's measuring peak and RMS. I'm going to move the threshold down to 0 because I don't want to apply any compression. I'm just using this purely as a gain boost. Let's just go through and do this now. So what I'm going to do is let's part that, and let's get the level meter there. I'm just going to check OBS, just make sure you can see both. If I transition that. Okay, I'm not sure you can see both plugins there, so what I'll do is let's just do I'll cross between one and the other. So let's move that out of the way. So let's play the track.
But I've been trying to forget you and your cursed touch, but I've got...
Put the ceiling at -1, that would help, wouldn't it? So put the ceiling at -1, and let's boost the gain, and I'm going to get the loudness meter up in a second. We'll take a look at that and we'll read the true peak levels.
Empty bottle blues, come drag me down. Empty bottle.
Okay, so if we now get the level meter in place.
Blues, come watch me drown. I don't...
Perfect. And as you can see here, this is your true peak reading. So what we need to do is for the streaming platforms, we need to make sure that we're allowing at least -1, maybe -2, depending on the platform and depending on the perceived loudness. Something that we just need to consider as well, if you start to master over or louder than -14 LUFS on the integrated level, you may just need to allow a little bit more of a buffer. Why do we need to allow a buffer? Well, it's basically just uploading songs to the streaming platforms. It may add volume as part of the algorithm and the upload process. So what they want you to do is allow a true peak buffer, so that if there is any additional gain that's added to the tracks as part of the upload process, it's not going to cause additional clipping or any clipping at the upload stage. Because the last thing you want is to send your tracks off for your distributors and then find out that they've uploaded it and you've got clipping. So that is why they want you to set a true peak buffer there. Okay, let's just come here, let's tidy that up. So, and then now we've discussed true peak. So I want to quickly show you a couple of true peak meters. So if you want to know how you can start to measure true peaks, I'm in Studio One here, and the stock meter is perfect, and you've got lots here. It does your true peak levels, and it does your LUFS and your R128. So you get lots of different options there. But if you haven't got, if you're not using Studio One, a couple of options. The trusty Union loudness meter, it gives you your true peak max, as well as your LUFS and your short-term levels. Or you've also got another favourite here, which is the TV Pro Audio. It's the DP Meter 5, and this gives you a lot as well. So this one's RMS, but you've got lots of different options. So you love EBU R128, so you've then got your True Peak Max, and then you've got all your integrated LUFS, short term and your momentary. So if you're not using Studio One and you want to get a loudness meter, the DP Meter 5 and the Julian loudness meters are both free, and they are great options. So that is that aspect of it. Okay, and the last reason really is why do you want to leave some headroom is for the mastering process. So when it comes to mastering, we use lots of different techniques. So it could be EQ, it could be compression, could be maybe some saturation. We certainly add gain through limiting, and we just need to allow a little bit of headroom for that processing. Because when we start to this, I want to show you an example in a minute of where we really kind of fine tune the limiter, because this is, you really want to get this correlation between your true peak level and your integrated LUFS. If you mix your track and you mix it to, let's say, 0.5, if I was to then apply a limiter straight to that source without adjusting the volume, and if I was to put the ceiling at -1, before I've even done anything, we're going to get half a dB's worth of gain reduction. So this is what we need to start to allow just a little bit of headroom there, just so we can take into consideration any additional processing that may be needed. Okay, so that's something to consider as well. Right. Let's just quickly discuss, well, how do you get headroom? So headroom is, okay, saying we need to leave the headroom. Well, how do you get it? Well, the most common ways are gain staging your mix. So when you're actually doing your mixing, you've got all your different channels, you really want to try and ensure that you're leaving a couple of dB's worth of headroom on your master channel. So when you've done your balances and you've done all your fader moves, you've added your EQs, your compressions, and you've done all your processing, the end sum on your master channel, you really want to try and get that, say, a couple of dBs. It doesn't have to be crazy, but you really want to leave a little bit of headroom there on your master channel. So the main process, the main way to get some headroom is through gain staging your mix, setting conservative levels at recording and pre-mixing stage. Once again, it depends how you're recording and what you're doing, but say if you try and record conservatively, or setting your levels conservatively, you're not then going to be slamming your master channel. I know some people prefer to go hot into their channels and then do some form of normalization. That's fine, that's all part of the gain staging process, if that's what you want to do. But it's, once again, just paying attention to your master channel, making sure you're leaving some headroom. Achieving balance with your rough mix, once again, balancing your faders. So when you're doing your rough mix and you're setting your levels, making sure you've got your stereo field moves and your panning and your ultimate individual instrument levels, just make sure that when you're doing that stage that you leave a couple of dB's worth of headroom on your master channel. And the last option is by reducing the clip volume. We can do this in the DAW, subject to the DAW parameters and the bit depth, and it's a nice segue into the next part of the topic. So before I go any further into bit depth, let's just see if there's any questions at all. Okay, fantastic. So you can see the limiter. Yeah, I think it's just the it's just some of the quirks. It's because in OBS I don't want to use the display capture, because if I use a display capture, every time I flip between YouTube and OBS, you'll see it on the screen. So I've done it as like a screen cap, and it's just a bit, really need to sit down and work it all out with the plugins and how the plugins show. So that's fine. Okay, so let's just briefly go on to bit depth. It's one of those ones where it can be quite an involved discussion around bit depth. But bit depth in the analog to digital conversion, this is where bit depth, it defines the audio's amplitude, is the easiest way to put it. So when we convert from the analog to digital realm, the signal needs to be replicated, and depending on your bit depth depends on effectively how many times that signal gets replicated and how many times that frequency gets replicated. So it defines the audio's amplitude, and bit depth determines the number of amplitude values we can record for each sample. And I'm going to put a link in the comment section to an iZotope blog. It is fantastic. It's really clear and really concise, and explains bit depth and sample rate, and they're really great explanations. So bit depth is something we usually look at in either 16-bit, 24-bit, 32-bit float now, which is something that's, say, very much more in the modern music production realm. And in simple terms, the higher the bit depth, the higher the resolution the audio will be, and there will be less chance of digital distortion due to a decreased noise floor, which gives us even more headroom before distortion occurs. So just think, so the more bit depth is going to give you a higher resolution, okay, which creates less, it's going to give us less distortion. The noise floor is basically there when we so when we reduce the noise floor, it gives us more space available in the ranges before we start to hear white noise effectively. And so in the bit depth, it's going to decrease the noise floor, and it's just going to reduce your distortion. So when we talk now about modern DAWs generally have an internal 32-bit float processing. So even if you record in 16 or 24 bits, when you import it into your digital audio workstation, or when you start to do any particular processing, generally what will happen is it will convert it to 32-bit float. So it will do it automatically for you, even though the project may be 16-bit or 24-bit file. And then what then happens is when you've done your processing, the playback is all done. They'll apply some internal dithering, etc., to ensure that the playback is, as clear and cohesive as possible. So because of that additional 32-bit float processing, it actually opens up the doors to a lot of different avenues. So for example, because we're going to have that increased headroom, as long as your master bus isn't clipping, then even if you are a bit too hot into your master channel, you can just turn it down. And whether you do that at your fader level, just really want to give yourself a little bit of headroom. So if you do go too hot into your master channel, there are some ways and means that we can reduce it. I mean, certainly with the mix you can pull the faders down slightly, but when it comes to the actual processing before mastering, there's lots of different methods. As a mastering engineer, if I get something that's a bit too hot that's sent through, as long as the master channel hasn't been limited before it's been exported and sent to me, I can just pull down the level of the track a little bit. And it's just literally as simple as that, because of the extra processing we've got through the 32-bit float method. So don't necessarily worry too much. As long as you're not clipping the master output, just know that there are some methods where we can create some headroom, even if we haven't done that at the mix stage. There's always, a way around it, as long as you haven't limited the master channel at the mix stage. Okay. So it really kind of gets to the last few bits I really want to talk around headroom. And one of the main questions is, well, how much headroom should I leave? And this is something that's really, is kind of, there's a little bit of myth here, and there's a little bit of old knowledge from more of the analog days. And I'm going to treat this very much as if it's going to be a digital master. And the reality is, as long as it's not clipping, as long as you are not clipping the master bus, we can make some headroom by reducing the clip file. I think I would always recommend leaving a couple of dBs, maybe 2 or 3 dBs, because it kind of gives the master engineer one less thing to think about, basically. But we can always go in and we can always reduce the level of the clip. That's not an issue at all, as long as you're not clipping the master out, because once it's clipped and rendered, there's nothing we can do about it. They'll have that clipping, that distortion on the wave file. So try and keep a couple of dBs, 2-3 dBs. Some people say leave 6 dBs of headroom. That is something that's really brought over from the analog days. And if, like, I'm a big supporter of getting the loudness first. So if you're going to leave 6 dBs worth of headroom, and I'm going to then put a limiter on to bring it up to level, it just doesn't. You don't really need 6 dBs worth of headroom. A couple of dBs will be fine. If you think about the digital ceiling, if we need to leave 1 or 2 dBs worth of digital ceiling and the limiter, and if we've got, say, an extra dB there to do some processing, that'll be fine. I don't really think you need to start, doing much more than, say, 2 or 3 dBs. That's my opinion. I know some other people may have some different opinions. Let me know what you think in the comments down below. It'd be really interesting to know what you guys have, what you guys think, and what your thought processes are. Me personally, I don't think you need too much, especially in the modern digital realm. There's lots of different ways and means that we can approach headroom. Okay. So just to say, discussing that through streaming alone, we could lose. Okay, we lose 1 dB for the limiter, so better to be safe than sorry. Okay, so that is just. Before I come on to the real last point, so just to quickly summarise then, so the headroom is your difference between the digital ceiling and your peak level, and then when it comes to the how we get to, or how we create some headroom, think about your mix, think about your balancing. But in the modern day processing, when it comes to mastering, we can reduce the clip size down to allow some headroom, and then we need to leave some headroom for additional processing. We need to leave it for intersample peaks, and we need to leave some headroom for the upload process on the streaming platforms. So that's just a real kind of a brief overview on the headroom. But there is one point that I want to come on to before I really just kind of hand over to you guys and see if you got any questions, which is, headroom is great. It's a great concept, and it's something that I think is very important, but it is absolutely irrelevant in leaving any headroom if you squash your mix. Okay, so if you think about the concept of headroom and what we're leaving headroom for, we're leaving headroom for additional processing. And if you've got a limiter that's got a ceiling of -1 dB, and if that's what these streaming platforms are recommending, say the headroom for their upload process, if I need to look at this, so let's say we're mastering this, and if we're looking at trying to increase the volume of the track because we want to get the perceived loudness, we want to get the LUFS, the integrated LUFS, we want to get that higher, and if we've already got a squashed mix that is relatively close to the peak level, then all I'm going to, as any mastering engineer, all we're going to be able to do is add additional compression onto an already compressed mix. So the more you compress the mix, the more it ties the hands of the mastering engineer, and headroom becomes irrelevant, because you can then effectively, if you then say, especially if you're going hot into your master, and you got a heavily compressed mix, even if you render that's not clipping. And if I then reduce the headroom down to say -4, -5 dBs, all I'm doing is I'm turning down the volume of a compressed mix. That's all I'm doing. So all I've then got to then do is then use a limiter to push it back up to the perceived loudness, which is going to add more compression. So whilst headroom is great and it's a great concept, what's actually more important is actually ensuring that we leave enough dynamics at the mix stage for any additional processing at the master stage. Now, it's just balance. It's not saying don't compress or don't do this or don't do that, but make sure that you're not over compressing. Don't do lots of bus compressors all over the place. I know bus compression is good when you've got lots of different buses for, say, drums or vocals, and trying to glue the different vocals together, or all of the drums together. That's great. But if you then get lots of different bus compressors over, and if you stick one on the master before you do the render, then you're adding lots of different compression at different stages, which is going to tie the hands at the mastering stage. Because even if you leave headroom, if you've over compressed the mix, then you've got nowhere to go at mastering. So when you boost the level with a limiter, I'll keep going on about this, a limiter in its purest form is a compressor. So if you then boost the level when it goes above the digital ceiling, not above the ceiling of the limiter, that is at the point when the limiter starts to apply compression. And if you then apply limiting compression on top of a compressed mix, it's just going to sound even more flat than if you was to allow a little bit more life with a bit more dynamics. So something just to really kind of bear in mind. That is probably the key takeaway for me. And let's say out of this whole live stream today, if there's one thing that you need I'd ask you to take away, it's just that. Think about your dynamics. Headroom, we can always say look at after the fact. So as long as you're not clipping the master, and as long as you're not putting a limiter on the master channel and doing too much like processing on the master channel, when you do the render, we can reduce the file size down and add a little bit of headroom that way. But if you've over compressed at the mix stage, there's not much we can do with that. Likewise, if you do have clipping at the master on the master channel before you render, before mastering, there's not much we can do with that either. So a couple of things to think about: just don't overload your master bus, and think about your dynamics. Try and allow just maybe just a fraction, a little bit, maybe keep it on the more dynamic side, just so you've got a bit more wiggle room in mastering. If you want to add a mastering compressor, you can do that. If you just want to use your limiter and add your compression that way, you can do that. But once again, if you do too much at the mix stage, then you're really tying your hands at the mastering stage. So that is really all the different bits I wanted to go through in terms of the concept of headroom. Very much kind of 101, bit of an overview. So I hope you found that useful. And then what I want to do now is just hand over to you guys and just see if there's if anyone's got any questions at all. So I'm just going to have a look at the. Okay, so just going to have a quick look at some of the questions here. And great question. Would you recommend having no limiting before mastering? I would always recommend no limiting on the master channel, definitely. But I think it's, once again, it's one of those things where it depends what you're doing. If you've got some form of artistic production technique, whereas if you're doing some form of, I know, hip hop, for example, limiting is quite common on drums and drum buses and things like that, to really kind of to push that level and almost kind of create that almost like an artistic drive. So if you're doing something like that, limiting's fine. It's when you start adding the limiter on the master channel, that's the real kind of battle. Because if you start doing that and you start limiting, a hard limiter is basically, it's going to stop the peaks at the ceiling. It's going to cut them off hard. And if you do that on the master channel, then you're really tying your hands when it comes to the mastering stage, because all you're then going to do is squash the mix rather than, I say, controlling any dynamics that needs to be done. So in terms of a limiting, no limiting on the master channel, but if you do it on a bus or individual channels as part of the process as an artistic choice, then absolutely go for it. Certainly don't ever stop doing that for the artistic, just for the sake of the production, except when it comes to the master channel. Okay, so that's what I'd recommend there. Anyone have any questions at all? More than happy to take any questions, anything mastering related. It doesn't have to be headroom. Any concerns you've got, or if there's anything you particularly a concept you're not particularly happy with, or not you want a bit more guidance on, or if there's a particular plugin that you want to know how to use, or anything like that at all, then drop us a quick question. It is 8 o'clock. I've got plenty of time, so if anyone's got any questions, then drop them in the chat, and I'll answer those for you shortly. Have a quick slurp in my tea. A limiter on the bass guitar. Great. I mean, bass guitar is probably very forgiving, because of course if you think about a bass guitar, it's quite a compressed instrument anyway, so it's not unless you're doing something like maybe fingerstyle, but if you're certainly like the hard rock kind of genres, it's quite a compressed format anyway. So having a limiter on the bass guitar actually probably works, because it's a relatively compressed signal to start with, so you're not really going to be squashing too much of any peaks at that stage. So yeah, that's certainly a good one. Do you use the soft clipper on the S1 limiter? What's a good situation to use it? I don't use the soft clipper on the Studio One limiter. I do use clipping, or a soft clipper. I've got the clipper from IK Multimedia, which is a good one, but the one I really enjoy is the, let me quickly go back to the door and I'll show you. It's the Ven Audio one, which is, I think it's called something like the Free Clip or something like that. I've just done my Studio One folders. Oh, here we are. Let's go here. Ven Audio, free clip. So this is the one that I like using. It's very easy and simple to use. I like the oversampling. There's something with clipping because of the fact that you can inherently add some distortion, and its aliasing is something we need to be mindful of, so always look at something like the oversampling. But the thing I like about this is you can use this in a mastering context with the soft clip type, or if you want to add this in more of say an artistic way, you can really say turn it around and treat it as more of a different clip. But the way I like using this is if I've got thinking about the overall peak level and say really trying to control the peak level, I use it sometimes going into the limiter, and rather than using the one that's built into the limiter, I like doing this separately. So the way sometimes I'll stack limiters because I want to control the true peak level, but actually if there's just the odd peak that's kind of sticking out, I like using this because I just think it gives more. I don't know. It's less of a compressed sound. It's just more of a natural clipping. That's basically what it's doing. It's just shaving the transient and taking it off rather than compressing or squashing. And I just feel that going into the limiter gives a much more natural sound. And likewise, it's kind of with the clip ceiling here. You kind of just set your ceiling, and if you want it to say -1, set that. Then going into the limiter, put it on your master channels or if you're in the project page, for example, in Studio One, then put it on your master inserts before your limiter, and it kind of just helps the limiter. It takes a little bit of the stress off the limiter and gives you a much more consistent and natural sound, I feel. So this is a great one. It's free clip by Ven Audio. So this is in the title there. It is free. They do a paid version which isn't very expensive, which I'll be getting at some point soon because I think these are great. So that's highly recommended as well. But that's how I would use clipping, usually on, let's say, before the limiter, after everything else, just to control the transients going into the limiter. Okay. Another good thing as well is if you want to use, so I'll give you another example of how to use a clipper. So I've just recently done a 19 song project for a client, and one of the particular songs right at the beginning, there was 3 kind of loud rings, and they were triggering the true peak. So when I say triggering the true peak, the rest of the track was coming in no higher than -1, but these 3 particular transients were sending it to, I think, about 0.7. So what I was actually able to do is actually use the clipper as a event effects. So I was able to cut the little sections where it was triggering the peak levels go over -1. I was then able to put the clipper on there, and it was just, say, shaving the tops, and it was just controlling those transients going into the rest of the song. So that's another good use for it. If you've got just something small that's poking out on your track, then maybe say cut it up, use it as event effects, because it's good at controlling just those individual transients as well, for mastering, that is. So that's another good way of using it. So okay. Okay, anyone else got any questions at all? Am I completely in the box? Because you have Outboard gear as well, all in the box. I experimented with some Outboard gear, but it's, for me, I just feel I've got much more control. I know, I think when it comes to people's love of analog gear, and they will say this quite openly, they have their love of the gear because it adds that certain character, etc. But when you speak to them, it's kind of like, well, what is it that causes that character? And it's the it's the inconsistencies with the way the analog gear works, and I kind of get that, and it's great. I love the thought of it, but I really like trying to achieve a nice consistent setup, and in the box is perfect for that. And once again, it's the whole ethos around mastering the box is trying to give people that encouragement to say you can do it. You don't need to have thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds worth of outboard gear. The monitoring setup is crucial, but it's not to say that you can't do it. You'll be surprised now the amount of pro mastering engineers are now mastering on headphones. They will go through the process of obviously your DAC, your HD and D2A converters are going to be a paramount, and you need to get a decent headphone amplifier, and obviously look at some relatively decent headphones. But the amount of pro mastering engineers now are just going all in the box and doing it all through headphones now is it's becoming extremely popular, and the reason why is consistency. So yeah, that's the thing for me, is I don't do outboard. I've dabbled. I do like looking at things. I think we all have the old touch of the old gas, the gear acquisition syndrome every now and again, don't we? But no, I'm sticking very much in the box these days. What about you, Paulie? Have you got any outboard gear that you use, or are you all in the box as well? Another thing, just to add on that, is another thing that when we're talking about plugins, and it's with the mastering plugins, I also kind of tend to try and go for something that's, I don't go too much on the analog emulation side. I do use some of the analog emulation plugins, but for me, I'm trying to keep, with mastering, I'll try and keep everything as transparent as possible. And the thing with analog emulations is they're trying to emulate a piece of hardware gear, and that is great if you want to vibe on a certain bit of character. And I tell you what I do use, which I love, are the Studio One, the Fat Channel XT plugins. They're great. But when it certainly comes to I think some of the things, I try and keep them more less analog style, because I don't really want to colour too much of the sound. So for me personally, I try and, if it's something that's bespoke that come out, I really like the TDR stuff. The Nova is my favourite plugin at the moment. It's a dynamic EQ, which is brilliant. I really enjoy that. But I try and think of some more things that are more bespoke, non-analog based, just because I don't really want to add too much character. The mix engineer and the client, they've really kind of got the sound that they want. For me, mastering is more about just kind of adding certain, just kind of adding those extra little embellishments to the mix. Hi Alistair, is the dynamic mode on the levels meter a good gauge to maintain a good dynamic mix? That's a real great question, to be fair. Is it a good gauge to maintain a good dynamic mix? I would never, I say never, I probably have been examples, but I wouldn't really worry too much about the dynamic modes on a level meter. I think the thing is, it's kind of, we can get so distracted by what something tells us by visually, rather than what it sounds like. And I think that's the thing, is when it comes to dynamics, it's really kind of, it's really trying to listen out for the changes in the overall volume. I don't necessarily rely on a plugin for that. I try to do that all by ear. It's more of a feel, more of a vibe, and it's also going to depend on the genre, and that's something as well. It's it's all going to be genre specific. So I wouldn't worry too much about a dynamic mode on a level meter as being a good gauge to maintain a good dynamic mix. I know there are tools out there that some of the big companies, they use these tools that tell you where certain things should be at certain frequencies, and we talk about crest factors and stuff, and bits and bobs like that. I kind of get that there could be a need, but I don't really I don't personally use them. I would much prefer going by ear. And the other thing for me is kind of I mentioned it earlier on about this recent project I've just done, and it was quite how do I explain it? It was a electronic style, but it wasn't EDM. It's more kind of, I'd say it's kind of old school, kind of garagey type vibe. And the thing that I was kind of noticing with that, the overall tracks were, they were the waveforms were looking quite squashed. And you look at it and you think, oh, should it be like that? And you have to stop yourself looking at it and thinking, what does it sound like? Does it sound good? And the thing is with a waveform is if you've got something that's particularly, if you've got something that's dominating the peak level that you're controlling with your dynamics at the mix or mastering stage, but if you've got something that's underneath, that's kind of, you can have a lot of dynamics sitting underneath that you wouldn't necessarily notice just by looking at the waveform. So I don't tend to look at any visual references, even with the level meters. I will get in the ballpark at the beginning when I'm using the limiter, but once again I don't really look too much at the level meters after, except for the true peak level. I'm not really worried about the overall LUFS and what the LUFS is, as long as, once again, as long as my recommendation to anyone will be get it over -14, and then just use your ears. Just go for what you think feels best. Agreed in headphones. Recently checked out a huge online mastering company. They do a lot on mastering the headphones. Glenn Schick is one of the top mastering engineers out there. Now I'm going to caveat this by saying Glenn Schick uses probably headphones that are $4 or $5 grand. I know he uses all these, whatever they are, that have cost thousands of pounds. But I suppose when you compare that against a mastering set of monitors that you're looking, 10, 20, 30 grand, and then you're looking at all the other gear that goes along with it, $4 grand probably isn't a big spend for a consistent monitoring setup. But yeah, I mean, headphones are I think they're certainly the way to go, especially for a lot of us. Once again, if we're in these these smaller environments where the monitoring setup isn't as consistent, headphones are the way to go. They're getting so good with the technology now. I haven't checked out anything like SonarWorks or anything like that. I did look into a couple. I've recently just got into the Olo Audio S4X. I've got a pair of them and they are fantastic. They're not cheap, they're about £400, but they are well worth it. And to get something similar, you're probably looking at about £1,000 to £1,500, so they're certainly worth the money. There's a few companies that do the software that do the the headphone EQing for the Olos, but as I say, it's very few and far between at the moment. I might look into something like SonarWorks. One thing that I really want to kind of get into and is to give some recommendations for as well is headphone amps. It's probably one of the most underrated piece of studio gear for someone who mixes or masters on headphones. I think we rely on the headphone amp that is built into the interface, but when you look into the actual specs, the headphone amp is probably the last thing to go in there. It's probably the last fault. It's an afterthought, and if you can get a decent one that's got its, so the way that the interface works is you'll have your digital to analog converters. If you're lucky, you might get an interface that's got its own A to D and D to A converter for the headphone amp. But the headphone amps generally, they're not that powerful, especially on the more budget end. So I really want to kind of do something around the headphone amp and how the benefit of having a headphone amp in addition to an interface could really kind of to boost your monitoring setup using headphones. Doesn't have to be expensive. We're not talking, we're not talking hundreds of pounds. It could be just something as simple as a £150 one. There's a few ones I want to look at, and so I'll come on to that in a future video. But that's something I really want to kind of get into as well, is how you can use a headphone amp in addition to your interface or your A to D, D to A converter to really kind of improve your monitoring setup. What's your thoughts on stuff like Ozone that uses AI to auto master your tracks? I'm not a big fan, if I'm perfectly honest. Now, I would check out the the Isotope YouTube channel, because Jonathan Weiner there is a fantastic mastering engineer, highly respected, and I think he sums it up brilliantly. Is when you use the mastering assistant, it's a starting point, and I think this is the thing that some people don't understand, is when you use the AI is only going to get you so far. You've then got to go in and kind of craft the sound that you want. So something like Ozone with the mastering assistant, it could be a good starting point. But the thing I find with them is, how does it know what you want the song to sound like? Is really the truth of it. And I think with things like your landers and stuff like that, I know they have presets. I understand they have presets, but how far can you get on a preset? Whereas if you start to learn to either master yourself, or if you go with a mastering engineer, you can really, not only you can build up your relationship and get the sound that you want. And especially if you're doing it yourself, just by understanding a few of some of the basics, I feel you can do a much better job than some of these AI things. And certainly if you go with a mastering engineer, if you build up a relationship with them, it can really just take your songs to the next level, because it is about understanding what you want from your songs. And I don't think that AI at the moment can really do that. It can get you, I know that they use these algorithms that measure the certain characteristics of certain songs in certain genres, and they go through thousands and thousands and thousands. But Christ, how many different rock songs? We look at rock as a genre. How many different sounds and tones are there out there for the rock genre? And how do they know what kind of sound and feel and that kind of thing that you're going for? They're not. They're going to get you in a ballpark, and it's then down to you to kind of do the rest. So I think something like the mastering assistant could be good, but you'd have to go in and change it. I found the assistant changed my mix too much. Yeah, exactly. So it's something like unless you can get something that really really goes into the nitty gritty, and you can really craft before they do the AI, it's not something that I particularly I'm fond of at the moment. But I do understand that it very much it serves a purpose and serves a need, especially the isotope stuff. They are really good. My eyes were open to the ozone stuff a little while ago. I didn't realise you could do quite so much with the advanced stuff as you can. And the thing I really like about it is you can use them as individual plugins. You don't have to use them in their environment. So for me, if I was to use something like ozone, I would love to use it in conjunction with Studio One and use them as individual plugins. But that would be, I'm not really too fussed about the mastering assistant kind of thing. Agree about using our ears, meters just markers leading to the ball. But exactly. And I think that's the thing is, I kind of alluded to this a little while ago. When it comes to, especially when it comes to loudness, it's still the thing for me. I still get a little bit kind of baffled when people say, well, you need to master to minus 14 laughs, or you need to master this or master that. Yeah, I don't agree with it, and I don't agree with it because there's no consistency. If there was consistency amongst the entire industry, then yeah, okay, I can understand using something like a loudness target figure, but there isn't any consistency. And like we've discussed in this, when it comes to your true peak figures, some will ask for a true peak level at -2, some will ask for a true peak level at -1. Well, if you think about your song, if you think about where you are with your song, where you're mastering it, if you master it, say, if you was to go, say, even above -1 and say use 0.5 as your ceiling figure, which some people do. I know some people like to master for all platforms rather than just digital distribution. But let's say, for instance, you was to master, say, at 0.5 rather than -1, then if a streaming platform that uses -2 as a true peak level, because of their algorithm, then potentially that's going to cause some clipping. It's kind of like, well, it may do on one platform, it may not do on the other platform. How many streaming platforms are there? There's tons of them, and there's no consistency amongst the industry. So you're absolutely right, use your ears. And the other thing is, once again, there's no point using a target, because each song is going to, how many songs have I said I've mastered to -14 LUFS because they sounded good at -14? Not many. Now, I don't smash the masters by any stretch of the imagination, but you know, they probably invariably, certainly the more dynamic ones, maybe end up at something like -12, -13. You know, it's kind of like, it is what it is. The projects I've just done, the client was specific in he wanted to look at releasing these songs on Beatport and things like that. So I spent the time to listen to some of the songs on Beatport, which kind of varied between say -8 and -12. With his, I actually got them somewhere around, I think it was around -11, and I didn't want to kind of push those too far because they were old tracks from DATs and mini discs, so they were 16-bit files. So I didn't really kind of want to go too much with those. But once again, it's kind of the song sounded good at that level, and that's what, you know, the client was very specific about his kind of market. You know, -14. I wasn't worried about -14 at that stage. So yeah, agree. Use your ears. Meters are just markers leading to the ballpark. Exactly. Tone Control 2 goes on master bus on every mix. Is the tone control, is that the one that kind of that tells you where they kind of believe? If this is the one I think it is, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the isotope one? And you kind of get a bit of a chart on the screen and it kind of plots where they think the frequency should be, and it kind of, is that the, you know, the crest factor one, I think they call it? Is that the one? If you can clarify that, Paulie, that'd be great. But yeah, I mean, some of those are really good. I did a little while ago, I did a video consultation with someone from the Presonus Facebook group, and he was using I think it was the Neutron, the isotope Neutron, and the one that he was using, I can't remember what the actual plugin was called, but it was actually the one where it separates the stereo mix. So it's actually quite an interesting one. You've got one vertical line down the middle, and then you've got all your different instruments along the line, and then you can move them up, down, whether you want them front or back, or you move them left, right, depending on whether you want them panned. Quite an interesting concept to be quite, you know, it was quite a good thing to do, and he certainly seemed to enjoy it. I think it's one of those things that it would certainly take a lot of the panning and things like that out of the equation. So yeah, if it's something that works for you, then go for it. And yeah, once again, it's nice to have that if it kind of gives you a good ballpark figure as to where things are. The thing I would say that I do like about them is when it comes to perceiving loudness, if you've got too much of a build up of high end, we do perceive as humans, we perceive high end louder than we do low end. So something like that could be very good. If you've got overly bright mixes or overly bright masters, something like that might actually come in quite useful. Because if you see that you're kind of overhyping the high end, then I could see why tone control there could be quite useful. So if it works, keep going with it. Okay. Anyone have any other questions at all? I'm going to transition back here because otherwise, as you can see, my mug in the corner with my logo over my face, which I've just noticed, which isn't particularly that great. Although some would say having a logo over my face might be much more appealing, especially my wife. I like to put their tone control 2 into their EQ and use that as the target for the tone control 2, so you get to see a dynamic range EQ, spectrum analyzer in one plug-in screen. Yeah, that's you know, it's certainly something that I can see why that would be a benefit. And if you like doing it that way, then great, keep doing that. I use the Neoverb in my mix, but I also edit the parameters after AI and make their recommendations. Exactly, and that's the thing, is it's kind of just crafting it how you want it to sound. I think they're good to get you in that, once again, in that ballpark place, but they can only take you so far. And it's like, you know, go in and then tweak to your heart's content and really craft the sound to where you want to get it. Yeah, I certainly say I certainly see they've got their benefits. if I was to kind of recommend something, I'd rather recommend something from iZotope than I would do from some of the other things, because it really allows you. It's good at getting you in that ballpark, and let's say they are very open about it. They're not trying to master or mix your songs for you. They're just there to help you to get you in that range that you want, and then you can kind of go in and tweak from there. So very much so. Okay, bit of a question for you guys. What I'm looking at, obviously, I'm a big fan of the Studio One stuff. I love Studio One. It's my DAW of choice. I've used it. I know it like the back of my hand, which is great. I sometimes use Reaper, because I know there's a lot of people on here that use Reaper. I think for me, I don't want to kind of get into too many DAWs, because I think it kind of then loses the point of trying to be more guided around some of the content I provide. But what do you guys think about, do you want to see more specific mastering guidance in one DAW? Would you like to see some more, some different techniques using different DAWs and some of the benefits of those? Something I've just got into as well is Acoustica, which is by Acon Digital. Now, something that Studio One doesn't do very well at the moment is some more of the repair and restoration type things. So with, for example, spectral editing and things like that, there's no kind of native support for spectral editing, but Acoustica by Acon Digital do a lot of things like that. So that's something I'm looking into as well. I'm going to start to look into maybe do a few of those around maybe some repair work and stuff like that. But what's your kind of thoughts? Would you like to see more focus on just maybe Studio One, maybe some more generic guidance that's it's more bespoke to different DAWs? What's your thoughts? Okay, presets are evil unless they're yours, but they can help you put you in exactly. Let's say it once again. I don't really use a preset. The only time I really use a preset is if something like a de-esser is something that that can be that I have used. I've used a preset for some kind of de-essing. But yeah, once again, it's just the presets for me haven't really kind of worked for what I've wanted them to, and I'm very kind of, as part of my process, I'm kind of very methodical about what I want to achieve with any plugin. So I don't tend to kind of look at the presets, but yeah, certainly with the DSE one is quite good. So if I want, I'm trying to think of the example now where I used it, but it could have been something like just trying to tame some hi-hats, and it might have been some kind of like some preset that was some high-end tame or something like that. But yeah, I mean, presets, I don't generally use them, but once again, it's not to say that that they're not particularly benefit. How much would good mastering cost for a 10-track album? Great question. It's a great question. It can really benefit, and I don't think it's as much as people think it would be. Certainly, if you wanted to kind of get an idea as to how much I charge, then drop me an email, smudge@masteringitb.com. We can have a chat about how much I would charge. I don't think necessarily, when you say good mastering, this is probably a bit more philosophical here. When it comes to good mastering, I think it's try and find a good mastering engineer that you can work with. I think that's the key. If you can find someone that you have a good relationship with, that can help you with your sound, that craft your sound, and give you the feedback that you need, I think that will go, that to me is almost just as good as the technical aspects of the mastering. So if you can find that, that I think will be more helpful. How much does it cost? It can cost anything. I think a lot of people are maybe put off by some of the more inexperienced engineers, and I can see why. I would recommend maybe looking for someone who's more bespoke than maybe someone who does mixing and mastering. I don't know. I've got some quite strong thoughts on that. But yeah, try and look for someone you can work with. I don't think it costs as much as you think it would, though. I don't think, certainly for a 10-track album, you know, you wouldn't be looking at thousands of pounds. Put it that way. Certainly not. I love Studio One. Never tried any other doors. The thing I like about Studio One, I've always had a little bit of a frustration with the project page. So the project page for me is, I don't see it as a mastering page anymore. I see it more as a finishing page. So I've always had this kind of frustration that they should, you know, they could really kind of go that real extra and do lots with the project page. But there's so much I can do with the song page. It kind of, yeah, I don't know. I kind of, at times, I feel like I'm kind of arguing for the sake of arguing, because there is so much that I can do with the song page, and then finish it in the project page. And I think that is the kind of thing. There are some real kind of beefs that I do have. With, I can't even make notes in the project page. That for me is just like, really? You got the macros, you can't use macros in the project page, or you certainly couldn't when I tried a few weeks back. Things like the event effects, you can't do any event effects in the project page. And it's like those things I kind of get frustrated with, but I can do all of that in the song page. And I could always do it as, I could do it all on one track and do all my songs. I could put 10 tracks on one track, use event effects to do the individual processing, export them into the project page, cut, and just do all the metadata and export. So that's, you know, that I've got to be kind of, you know, I do moan about the project page, but there's so much we can do with the song page. Reaper does very good spectral editing, definitely. I think that's the thing with Reaper. Reaper is good at everything, and you know, it's not just a digital audio workstation. I don't think a lot of people appreciate that Reaper is also great at video editing, and there's so many people that use it for video editing. It's great, and it's the thing with as like you say, the spectral editing is really good in Reaper, and that's something why, you know, I certainly like using it. I think the thing for me is the metadata side of things lets Reaper down, but once again, I think it's one of those things. How often do I use metadata at this point in time? Not a great deal. Metadata is one of those things that you know, when you've got independent artists that are uploading their music via your digital distributors, you have to put your metadata in through your digital distributor. So it kind of makes it irrelevant, kind of almost doing that at that stage, unless it's for CD. And you know, I've probably done one CD master in the last 2 years, so it's not that often. So yeah, I mean, Reaper is really, really good at certain bits. Bit fiddly for me at times, but that's not because it's a fault of Reaper. It's a fault of myself. I'm not quite as technical as Reaper can be. Probably prefer to stay within Studio One. Yeah, you need RX7, RX8 for Acon for that kind of editing. Acoustica is the Acoustica is their restoration DAW, and you've got all of that in there. So you've got all your spectral editing. There's like debris, denoise, this, that. It's very much along the same kind of lines as your RX type thing. It's geared towards repair, restoration. It is geared towards mastering as well, but one of the things I've found, just once again, I've not looked into it fully, but the bits I have looked into, it's separating all the different tracks out. I think if you put a mastering project into Acoustica, it splits them all into separate tabs, and for me it was just kind of like, if you want to do compare say volume, loudness, perceived loudness between the individual songs, I was just finding it a bit kind of fiddly moving between the different tabs, and it wasn't kind of a good it wasn't kind of a good way. Whereas if you've got it all in one kind of DAW, whether it's Reaper or Studio One, you can just click to whatever you want, and you'll get a good real-time comparison of the different volumes. But moving between the tabs, it just seemed a bit clunky. I know there is like a CD. It was like a CD view, and you could split all the different songs out, but so once again, I haven't really kind of looked into it too much, but I do know with the Acoustica you can do all your spectral editing and all kind of stuff like that. It is very much a fully fledged repair and restoration suite, as well as things like mastering and dialogue capture and things like that. So, but yeah, I try and keep the content that I'm doing. I want to try and keep it as neutral as possible, so you can really take the techniques to any DAW. There's some bits that you can do in Studio One. There's some bits we can do in Reaper, and it's really trying to do, get something that can work for any DAW. So I'll look at that. Okay. Okay, let's have a quick look at the time. This, where are we? We're 20 to 9. Give it another few minutes and see if anyone else has got any more questions. I've really enjoyed tonight. It's been, it's my second live stream. It's very something I'm learning. I'll be doing these. They won't be weekly, but I certainly want to do at least one a month, and try and do something that's very interactive. I like the fact that we can get some, get the questions and talk about lots of different topics. So yeah, I'm really I'm thankful for all of you for joining in today. I do enjoy doing these. Sometimes when you do the other videos, and I didn't think doing a 10 to 15, 20-minute video, sometimes it can take me, by the time you've planned it, recorded it and done all that, and then do the editing and the upload, it can take hours. And doing the live streams are a nice bit of a different welcome change. So it's something that I will be doing, say, probably monthly. But one thing that I really do enjoy is these interactive parts of it. So thank you all for joining. And if you've got any kind of ideas for content you want covered, then please let me know. And once again, I'm still always looking for different songs to master for the channel. If you've got something that you don't mind sharing on the channel, we can say do some mastering and master the track for you and feature it in one of the videos. Then great. Really looking for more content to do that on. The challenge we're doing it with the some of the client stuff is not everyone wants to to share all the content or share all their music through YouTube platform. I can understand with somebody, once again, if they're trying to make some money from it, etc. And with the Cambridge music technology stuff, I'm still going to use some of the stuff and feature it, but once again, it's not really designed for a platform like YouTube, because of the fact that if the artists have signed up for record deals, things like that, and with monetization and bits and bobs like that, it can be a bit finicky, let's say, with some of the permissions. So it's not really designed for YouTube. But if anyone's got any music or any songs that you think, what, I quite fancy having, let Smudge have a go at mastering and feature on the channel, and please get in touch, smudge@masteringitb.com, and we'll have a chat and see what we can do. Okay. Right, okie dokies. We've got no more questions coming through, then we'll call that a day. Once again, thanks for everyone for joining. I do enjoy these, and thanks for all your questions and things like that. I do like to make these interactive, and if you've enjoyed it, don't forget to kind of give us a like. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe. All digital mastering related. And if there's anything that anyone's got any concerns about, or if there's anything you're struggling with, get in touch. I'm always looking for different ideas and some different techniques to cover for tutorials. So if there's anything that anyone wants covered, then please let me know. So thanks once again, and all that's left for me to say, as per normal, is I hope you'll keep safe and well, and I'll see you in the next video coming real soon.